Okay, hello everybody. This is a new series that I'm starting that I'm calling uh, Technique Check-In. And what I thought I would do is I've done a little bit of this before when I saw something on Reddit and somebody asked, about money, and I tried to find their significator for finances or for substance, their significator for substance. And so I'm going to do, this time we're going to look at children. And so I have four charts that we're going to come to in a second. And we're going to look at this one particular technique and see how useful we find it. And now, generally, I've found this technique to be extremely useful. And we have four charts that we're going to look at. It should be easy to do. Excuse me. So we have four charts that we'll be looking at, and all of them are singers. All of them are famous singers. So we don't have to, none of the other factors. So they're all kind of the same subset, shall we say. But only one of them has had children, has actually given birth to children. Let's say it that way. Only one of them has, only one of them has given birth to a child. Let's put it that way. So four charts, only one has given birth to a child. And so we're going to look and see, like, well, you're going to know some of these names. So if you know some of the biographies, you may know which one. But we are going to look at them and see if how the astrology tends to confirm that or not. Okay, so of course, always I'm looking at Bonatti. This is the Bonatti corner. That's what I called it on Clubhouse, Bonatti Corner. And so that's what we're going to focus on. So the main technique is that we look at the 10th, the first, what is it? The 10th, the 11th, the first, and the seventh. So we're looking for significators of children in one of those four houses: the 10th, the 11th, the first, and the seventh. See if one of the planets that signifies children, so Jupiter, of course, is the significator for fertility and increase, anything that you want to multiply, be fruitful and multiply, that's Jupiter. Venus obviously is coitus itself and is the way that you get pregnant, so to speak, but it's also the love of parents and children together. It's love, and so that's another aspect. The moon, of course, which is the co-ruler for everything, but is also the ruler for mothers. It's the natural significator for mothers, but the moon always is the co-ruler for everything. Mercury is young people, is children, is people of the age of children, so people within between the age of 4 and 14 is Mercury. Lord of the fifth, of course, which is the house of children, the part of fortune, which you know that I like to use as another ascendant, as possibly another ascendant, the part of children and their lords. Note that he makes that relatively clear. So it's not just the part of fortune or the part of children and their lords. So we're looking at those. And to be honest with you, I would be looking at the lords more specifically than the parts themselves. Although obviously, if the parts are there, then that is an indicator that we should look at their lords more closely, right? Okay, so and then or are found in the aforesaid places. So let's see: Jupiter, Venus, the Moon, Mercury, the Lord of the fifth, the part of fortune, part of children, and their lords, right? So if we see any of these significators for children, it's a possibility. Or if one of those denying children, so just as we have planets that signify children, we've got planets that deny them as well. And so, of course, that's the sun because he's too hot and dry, Mars, who is also hot and dry, and Saturn, who, of course, is just the general killjoy and is the obstacle and cold and dry. So interesting. Remember, the womb is wet, and all of these planets are dry in nature, and all of them are malefic in nature. Certainly, the sun can be benefic or malefic. Is malefic, especially when a planet is conjunct, we call that combustion, or especially combustion in opposition, or the hard aspects generally. But the sun is definitely a malefic during combustion, and most possibly or most usually also with the opposition. Okay, so if one of the aforesaid significators of children were in the aforesaid places, or in one of them, or even in the fifth, right? Right, the fifth being the house of children, or they were made fortunate and strong, and we'll talk about that in a second. And one of the benefics were to aspect them by a trine or sextile, right? That all makes sense, right? So basically, it's saying if you see one of those significators in those houses or in the fifth, and they're in good condition, which means what? They are essentially dignified, more than likely, fortunate and strong. And one of the benefics, we're also aspecting them. That means Venus or Jupiter are trining or sextiling them with reception, or without reception, or even from a square with reception, right? So all of these things we talked about in past videos. So now we're going to go to the charts themselves. And we'll start with, I think that's Leontyne Price. So these are all famous black singing superstars, um, or maybe not superstars, but great famous singers. Okay, so this is Leontyne Price, who was the first African American, internationally recognized African American prima donna. And let's see, we're looking for the first, the 10th, the 11th, and the 7th. So already look at what we've got here. We've already got Saturn in the 10th, right? That's one of the planets that says no to children, even though the midheaven is 26 Scorpio. Saturn is very well situated in the 10th within, well, maybe not well situated, but certainly, well, look, if he weren't in the 10th, he'd be in the 11th. So that's one sign for no. Then we have all of this stuff in the first. We've got the sun within 10, 15 degrees of the ascendant. So, one of the things that I learned when we did our series on the 146 considerations was that the medieval astrologers believed that there was a most active part of the house, that the most active part of the house was from 5 degrees before the ascent of the cusp to 10 degrees or 15 degrees after. Yeah, I think it was, yeah, 15 degrees after. So any planet who was 15 degrees after the cusp of any house, especially an angle, would be in the most active part. And as it got further away, then it would, especially as far as angles were concerned, as it got further away, it would kind of weaken in its kind of angularity. And it's, we've talked about angularity being something that represents something that advances the agenda of a planet, right? So the ability to advance kind of slips further and further away. Interestingly enough, with the same thing with for instance, a cadent house like the 12th, as it gets further and further away of the active part of the house, what makes it cadent, it starts to gain in strength, right? Because almost all cadent houses are going next to an angle, right? So as the planet moves away from the cusp of the Caden house, then it starts to get stronger and starts to take on the qualities of angularity. And then as the planet in the angular house moves away from the active part of the angular house, it starts to become consolidate and take on the qualities of the succeedent house, which is still a strong house to be in, but not quite as strong as the angulars. So I hope everybody's following me here. But so interestingly enough, the only planet that's really within the 15 degrees is the sun. So already we have two of the planets that say no. And this is now, mind you, this may not necessarily, actually, it's within 10 degrees, isn't it? 26? Yeah, 6. So it's within 10 degrees of that cusp as well. It's within the angular, the active part of the house as well. So I just think that's very, very interesting that this shows it. Leontyne Price had no children, and so we've got these other things here, right? We've got the Mercury, we've got the Jupiter, we've got the Venus, and look at how well placed the Venus and the Jupiter are. But they really, I guess, by house they belong to the second. If we were looking at this through a whole sign lens, right? And Venus herself is within 5 degrees of the second house, which means which means that she basically is in the second house. So that takes her kind of out of the it takes her out of the equation. And of course, Mercury is here is in the sign of fall, even though it doesn't look like fertility was a problem. Mercury is the ruler of the fifth. So it doesn't look like fertility was a problem. It looks like possibility, ambition, fame and ambition might have been the things that did that instead. So that's an interesting. Obviously, we would look at maybe the Almutin of children, and we would look at maybe the first triplicity ruler of children. Let's do that right now. It's nighttime, so Mercury is the first triplicity ruler of children. It's in a fertile sign, but it's also in his fall, and it's applying to the Jupiter. That's the next application, but after that will be the square to the Saturn in its detriment. So even all of that, and look here as well, the moon has just left the application to Saturn. Right, the moon was one of the significators. Right, so this is a good place to kind of talk about this next issue, which is when these planets are in good condition. Right. So we're just looking, we were just doing the locational thing, right? One, was it 10, 11, 7, and 1, right? Those are the four houses where they said, hey, look for the planets that represent children, right? Or the planets that represent, you don't get to, you're not going to have any. We're just did that part. Now, the second part then is, hey, notice what kind of condition they're in, right? Because if you find those planets there, and they're in good condition, hey, that's a pretty good thing. So, that's what we're kind of looking for. So, in this particular instance, right, we've already talked about how the Sun and Saturn are in the most active part of the house, but note that all of the planets that represent children, yes, Mercury says yes to children, Jupiter says yes to children, Venus says yes to children, right? Um, they're all involved in either applying or separating to a square of Saturn. Obviously, Mercury is in fall and going to Jupiter, which is super. That sounds super fecund, but Saturn has just left or Jupiter. No, Jupiter is applying to Saturn. Jupiter is applying to the square of Saturn. Now, this is a square with reception. This is a square with reception. The Mercury to Saturn will not be. Well, the Mercury to Jupiter is is a conjunction, right? But the Jupiter to Saturn, that's a square with reception. The Venus is, like I said, she doesn't fully belong to the first house at all, in my opinion, because of the 5-degree rule. So in this particular case, this Jupiter, who looks like he would be able, it doesn't look like having children is the problem. It really seems like inclination. This is the ruler of the ascendant up in the 10th house of achievement. So it looks like really the ambition, the achievement was the decision. It was it was that challenge, the ego challenge of whether to fully be a woman and have children, or to follow my star, follow my dream. And I don't think that she's fully being a woman by having children, but certainly in this time period that would have come up. And note also, okay, so those are three of the significators they noted, and then the other one is the moon. And note that the moon just left the opposition to Saturn. So really, it looks like this personality really chose that this was not for them, even though it doesn't look like there would have been any problem at all with them having children. So that's just a base kind of baseline thing. We could go further into it certainly, but it's fascinating to kind of see this in action. Okay, here's Billie Holiday, a troubled person, fascinating person, amazing, influential singer. If you're not familiar with her, you should be. All of these singers, if you're not familiar with them, that you should be. And let's see. So this is also an Aquarius rising chart. And so we're going to look at 1, 7, 12. What was it? 1, 7, 1, 10, 11, and 7. Well, first of all, note how the nodes are here in the first and seventh, and that's interesting. But Venus is technically nope. Venus is she's really belongs to the second, right? Because she's at 6, and the cusp of the second is at 8. Um, the moon is in the 12th house, so that's one of the significators that's not there. There's nothing in these houses. Right. Oh, the ruler of the ascendant, Saturn says no, but he's also the ruler of the ascendant, right? Saturn says no children. He's in the house of children itself, and he's in a sterile sign of Gemini. What else? Doesn't look like, so it looks like in this particular case, the only thing, where is the part of fortune? Here's the part of fortune. And then, okay, so no, it doesn't. So in this particular case, it doesn't look like we would be able to find anything through the location. So what would the other things possibly tell us? What would other things possibly tell us about it? We do, once again, this is a very similar chart. We've got the fifth house because it's Aquarius, the fifth house is Gemini, and Mercury also here is in Pisces. So once again, fallen, fertile, but fallen, but also similarly, but actually more acutely than the Leontyne Price chart, it is being squared by the Saturn. Now, it's with reception. It's a square with reception, and they had mentioned if there's a square with reception, if it's well situated and there's a square, but it needed to be a square with what? It needed to be a square with a benefic with reception, and in this case, it's with a malefic with reception, and it's with reception to its. Well, both of Mercury signs are sterile, so it's with reception to a sterile sign. Venus here is fertile, Mercury is fertile, Mars is fertile, Jupiter is fertile, right? They're all in these water signs. Interestingly enough, one of the things that they mentioned about Billie Holiday was how much she loved children and how great she was with them, and just she fucking adored them, and she really did kind of want them. But her lifestyle, I think she just kind of knew her lifestyle, and there may be an abortion in there too, more than likely here with the Mars. I don't remember specifically from the biography, but there may have also been abortion involved. And of course, the Mars is also applying to the Saturn. It's being prohibited by the Mercury. And remember, the fifth house is not just the house of, it's not just the house of children. It's the house of sensual pleasure, of what pleasure and delight, of the things that we enjoy, of how we kind of pleasure what we take pleasure in, and we can see that this is kind of this might be more of a pleasure going chart, pleasure seeking chart than a childbearing and raising chart, and obviously problems too. Mars and Saturn. Mercury rules the fifth and the eighth as well. Mars and Saturn. Saturn rules the first and the 12th. Mars and Saturn are in square. So this is a there's much more perilous journey in this chart than in the Leontyne Price chart. Did we do the significator thing where we saw? Yeah, so Jupiter, Jupiter is in his own sign, Venus and Jupiter. And so this is such a similar chart to Leontyne Price, but with this square, with the Mars Saturn square, with the Mars, the Mars is in Taurus in the Leontyne Price chart. Here, the Mars is in Taurus, opposing the midheaven, or on the cusp of the IC rather. And then here, the Mars is here involved in the system with the Mercury and the Saturn. A matter of fact, you can actually call the Mercury, you could say that the Mercury is either prohibiting Mars, or you could say that the Mercury is translating Mars to Saturn. And that's probably really what's going on, translating Mars to Saturn. So that square to Saturn, this particular square to Saturn, in my opinion, has more implications. That other one in my opinion, has implications for work ethic. This one has for calamity. Note that the moon is the rule of the sixth, the bad fortune is in the 12th. Um, she was incarcerated, Saturn, the rule of the first and the 12th. In the fifth, she was incarcerated on drug charges. And so for vice and issues with vice, there's Venus and Venus and Jupiter and Mars and Mercury. There's all of these. She was a drug addict. There were drug problems, and yeah. So anyway, exactly. And so continuing. Okay, here's Ella Fitzgerald, also in the area of jazz, but way more versatile and universal, and just really probably one of the greatest singers of the 20th, the greatest female singer of the 20th century period, non-classical, of course. But so. Yeah, just Ella Fitzgerald is the living and the absolute greatest. This chart is wrong. Or is it? Venus. No, no, it's not. Okay, no, this chart's correct. Sorry. Okay, so let's see. So what are we looking for? We're looking for first. Now here we got Jupiter and Mercury, and then we've got the Moon in the 11th, right? So this is a possibility of children. Now the only little issue here is there's the Moon is separating from the sextile of Mars. The Mars is applying directly to the square of Saturn, and they are transferring fall. It's a mutual reception by fall, which is a mutual non-reception by fall. Let's put it that way. Neither of them like that sign. Mars is in his own sign. Saturn is a detriment. Mars is in the fall of Saturn. Saturn is in the fall of Mars. So Mars is in better condition than Saturn, but Mars is brought down by this Saturn. Now, who rules the fifth? In this chart, Jupiter rules the fifth. Okay, so it looks like this chart should produce children. Yeah, there's this Mars Saturn thing, and Saturn is in a fertile sign, and first triplicity ruler, it's a daytime. First triplicity ruler is the Sun. Sun is with Venus, so all of these indicate children. So indeed, Ella Fitzgerald, she adopted her sister's child. She did have children. But she herself did not actually have them, not actually give birth to them. And so that's what I'm trying to kind of figure out here is how we would necessarily see the difference. This chart does definitely point to, I guess, to child rearing, but we also know that she spent so much time, or rather, we know that she spent so much time on the road that she didn't really raise the children. She didn't really raise her child. They were, it was kind of raised in the family. A lot of times that would happen. I don't know exactly what happened with her sister, but I think the sister may have had the child out of wedlock, and often what would happen is the family would take it on. Maybe a relative would take the child and raise the child, or the whole family would kind of help to take care of the child. And I think that's kind of what was going on here, especially with Ella being on the road as much as she was. And so I'm wondering, I keep wanting to see this Mars Saturn as being a part of why she didn't have children, but it's not from what we're looking at. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for the part of children which is taken by day from Jupiter to Saturn. And so Jupiter is at 14 Taurus, Saturn is at 24 Cancer, which is 60 degrees plus 10, right? So there's a 60-degree difference between Taurus and Cancer, and there's 10 degrees between 10 and 14 and 24. So we do that same thing from the ascendant. So we project that same amount of space. So which takes us to 18 degrees of Libra, which is, remember, Saturn has exaltation in Libra, and plus, so it takes us to maybe, so we say 29 to the 29th degree of Libra, which means that Venus, okay, now that's interesting because, of course, this Venus is Casimir, but also that means she's deep in the heart of the sun, which could make it a little bit too hot to have them yourself. So that doesn't point. So I keep wanting it to point to the Mars Saturn, but it doesn't seem to. It seems to point directly at the Jupiter. Note also that Jupiter's in Venus's sign. All of these are the Sun, Venus, Mercury. Also, remember that the Sun is a significator for no children, and it's they're so close that even though it's Casimir, it's kind of creating like a supernaturally powerful state for the Venus. It's still in the midst of all that heat and a light and heat, and I think that might have something to do with it. Who knows? But yes, this chart does have a child. This chart did not have a child. This chart did not bear a child, but this chart has a child. Okay, so this is Diana Ross, and we're going to, well, the first thing we see here is there's an exalted planet, even though it's the sun, which is no, there's an exalted planet in the fifth house. And just to make that clear, and the ruler of the ascendant is also because of the, I guess, how far north she was born. She was born in Detroit. The ruler of the ascendant is also the ruler of the fifth. So let's look. So the first house, no. 10th house, no. 11th house, the part of fortune. So remember, that was one of those things they talked about, the part of fortune and its lord, right? And then the seventh house, no. In fact, we this is right at the very, very end. Now, here's a good example of what we're talking about. And I think this is a good thing, a good way to kind of look at it because there's so much kind of absolutism. Well, I mean, of course, I've been an absolutist about the five degree rule myself, but when you think about, okay, this, look at how big this is 34 degrees, this house, right? And Saturn is at the very end. It's not within the 5 degrees. It's at the very last degree of what could be called the seventh house. But doesn't it make sense that after 7 degrees, after 37 degrees, right, after 7 degrees of Gemini, right? 22 plus 15. After 7 degrees of Gemini, that Saturn's angularity, it's kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Its relevance to the angle becomes less and less. I mean, here it's almost kind of in a like a no man's land, like a void of course kind of thing until it gets within the 5 degree area, right? Because remember, the most important area is the 5 degrees before, the 15 degrees after, right? So that 20 degrees, 5 degrees before a cusp, 15 degrees after a cusp, which is why now I really understand why I'm so part of that, why I'm so, shall we say, partial to the 5 degree rule. Okay, note also that even though the moon's in the sixth, the moon is, looking just at all the significators because none of the significators we're looking for are in the house except for the part of fortune, right? Except for the part of fortune. And note here we have the ruler of the part of fortune exalted and angular. And there is a fantastic sextile reception with the moon. And so even though we don't have the locational thing here, what we have is well, yes, we do. Yes, we do. We've got the locational indicator right here. It says, look at my ruler. My ruler is exalted and in a fertile sign. My ruler is exalted in a fertile sign and angular. We know that angular planets are able to do what? Angular planets are able to advance their agenda, right? And so Venus's agenda, what's her agenda? Sex, usually, music, singing, dancing, and performance, beauty, pleasure, right? So any of those things in this person's life can be pushed forward. And sure enough, and we know that, I mean, let's just be straight up. This person used sex to become famous. She became the mistress. Matter of fact, her first child is with Berry Gordy, who was the head of Motown Records, and that was what kind of cemented her towards stardom, is getting involved with him. Like I said, then also, oh, so of course this chart has born children. This, remember once again that the moon is the natural significator for motherhood. It's exalted, even though it's in the sixth. Right, it's not quite within the 5 degree rule, but and then the Venus, of course, very, very strong. So, and the Venus is the ruler of the seventh. So, this chart, even, and then, like I said, we have this exalted planet in the fifth. So the sun, even though he tends to be a planet that says no, Leo is a sign that is, excuse me, that is sterile. We still have an exalted planet in the fifth. So the fifth can produce. The fifth can produce. We know that she primarily had daughters and that she was a fantastic mother, fantastic and loving and inspiring, inspirational mother. So I think that's a great place to kind of stop. So I what I the reason I'm excuse me, sorry. The reason I'm doing starting this series is because I want to start to do a blind chart reading series, and I'm because there's such a hodgepodge of techniques or lack of technique, to really be honest. There's just such a mess of lack of technique um, that can't really produce um, predictable results. And so we just looked at four charts, and using this one technique, we were able to basically kind of see the reality of the situation with each one. And so I think this is a really fascinating technique to look into, and we will continue exploring Benatti and the other techniques.